It's sometimes said at the Writer's Gym that writers are fueled by the combination of inspiration and perspiration. The need to get it all out, that ubiquitous vomit draft, and perhaps fear. In this episode, we'll look at the different types of fuel and nourishment writers can use, and we'll ask what makes Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen tick. As writers, I mean. Welcome to the Writer's Gym. The Writer's Gym podcast. Build creative confidence and grow your writing life with Rachel Knightley and Emily Inkpen. Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen.
Chris Gregory.
Welcome to this discussion about a writer's fuel. It's coffee, isn't it?
Yep.
Thank you for joining us on the Writer's Gym podcast.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Now, seriously though.
Seriously. Coffee.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's seriously.
Coffee.
Yeah. We edited out the full discussion because we didn't need the rest of it. It's just coffee.
It's just coffee.
Yeah.
Coffee.
But if we run marathons, we need to stop at feeding stations to
For
take
coffee.
on rarely coffee, water and energy gels. Many of us can't start a day without a coffee or 6. But what is it that fuels writers and nourishes them?
Mm.
And can you get it in Tesco?
It's on offer at the moment. 2
Is
for
there?
1. Yeah.
Right, writer's nourishment.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's 2 types of fuel that we need to talk about. One is perhaps the sort of stuff that we can get at Tesco's. And what I'm thinking there is,
Coffee?
are there
Wine.
drinks or foods that we should eat to keep our bodies sort of nourished so that we are in the best position to write?
Sure.
But then I think there's the psychological things, the praise, the encouragement, or fear, for example, that we need to spur us on to do writing. So we're going to explore all of those. So Rachel and Emily, any opening thoughts? You can say coffee again if you like.
I was debating it, but I felt like the very important point has been made, so I will stop with that one. I will just say that sleep and water and food makes such a difference. And the reason I will say it is I have members now and members in the past in the Writer's Gym who have different versions of a story where they're coming from either them or somebody else thinking that what it's meant to feel like is the struggling artist, the isolated, probably unhealthy, potentially chain smoking or drinking or whatever it happens to be. Now, I am not for a minute saying that system has not worked for some people, but
Miss Hemingway.
But at the same time, other brands are absolutely available, and I can absolutely say that now that I'm in a place where I feel very safe where I live, and I am eating better and I am sleeping regularly at the times that work for me, which I think is something we'll probably compare notes on, Emily, because you and I have very different body clocks.
Oh, yeah.
Finding what works for the individual writer in health terms, the fuel that you need biologically, and moving away from the shoulds and into the what works for me is so important. And this is why the gym vocabulary is so important, that we're not going, how many reps should I do? We're going, how tall am I? How strong am I?
Yeah.
What physically is going on with me? What do I want to be going on with me? So there's no objective should, there's just specificity, just like there is in creative writing. Understanding what you need in your health is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I used to actually think it's ideal to write with a glass of wine in front of you. And I actually, in latter years, I've realised that when I have alcohol, it just diminishes my productivity hugely. And it is this stereotypical idea, a writer wandering around the house with a glass of wine and a thought bubble over their head. And it just doesn't work at all. Not for me. Ernest Hemingway, I am not. I would say that my sort of ideal physical state, I've written this down here, is to not be particularly hungry or gassy. Ideally. And I've written while both. And it's not ideal.
Yeah.
So if you're the kind of person who gets a bit gassy after a meal, leave it enough time before you go that you're not anymore.
There's so much in that about your body distracting you, that that's getting yourself into a place where there is no pain or discomfort, that the body isn't saying I need something first.
Yeah.
And actually, since I've got a chair that is healthy for me at my desk, that's another example for me of where I'm working with my body rather than in spite of it.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's why, we're going to talk about body clocks and everything.
Yeah.
I'm an AM eater and I'm a nighttime writer.
Yeah.
Probably because by the time it gets to the evening, I'm done feeding my body. I don't get hungry in the evening. I get hungry in the morning, and I write much more effectively in the afternoon, evening. And maybe that's got everything to do with that. I'm not just thinking, when am I next going to eat? You know,
Well, let's start then on the foodie practical side of things.
Yeah.
And you've said you're an AM eater. Breakfast, very important to you?
Yeah, very important. Cannot function without breakfast. Normally these days, I always used to have cereal. Cocoa Pops featured heavily in my life.
I remember.
Yeah, Cocoa Pops every morning. Now it's Huel. I do like me a Huel in the morning. When I'm travelling for conventions and things at hospitals, conventions at hotels, that's what I'm going for.
You stay in hospitals?
I try not to when I'm travelling. So at hotels, I always start the day on a sausage sandwich. And this gives me a routine away from home. Because when you go to a hotel, there's normally a hot breakfast available. But because I can't drink milk, there's not always good non-milk options. So I can't rely on being able to have cereal. But when I'm away, I need a routine. I need to know what I'm going to have for breakfast. So I have a sausage sandwich. That sets me up for the day. You know, that's me. And I normally still need lunch, but when it comes to dinner time, I can take it or leave it.
Whereas I'm almost the exact opposite. Not quite. I need breakfast in order to get the best out of myself. I need lunch. It doesn't have to be big, but it has to exist. It's funny being vegetarian all my life and vegan now that I am that sort of rabbit image where you don't have one enormous meal and survive for ages the way a lot of the guys that I've been in relationships with in my life. They tend to be very tall, very big, and they can do the walrus thing of eating a very large meal and they're not eating for ages. I have to scavenge. I am herbivorous. I have to have a little bit and then a little bit, or my blood sugar drops and forget it. It's just nothing is going to really work.
Have you noticed, specifically in your writing, do you notice that your writing suffers in some way if you don't follow that sort of eating regime?
Everything suffers.
Do you find that concentration is the issue?
Yeah.
Is it mainly concentration?
The thing I said earlier about your body, when your body isn't saying I need something, you have the freedom to be in your mind. The more you're looking after your body, the more you're able to continue spending time in your head, in your writing world. You can't do that if you're dizzy or hungry or any of the other things. It doesn't allow for that because it's the pyramid of needs. You don't get to the luxury items of non-survival things until you've dealt with the survival things.
And I think it's very much a case of like, if I'm writing and I'm hungry and I think I'm going to get to the end of this, I'm going to write 500 words and then I'm going to eat, then I'm in a hurry with those 500 words and the 500 words aren't as good because I'm thinking I need to eat something. And so the more hungry I get, the more time I spend on those words, the longer it's taken me to get to something. You know, like it's just not conducive to.
And you're holding yourself to ransom in a way.
Yeah.
You're rewarding yourself with the petrol you need for the journey instead of putting the petrol into you so you can do the journey.
Yeah, exactly. Great way of looking at it. Yeah. It means that you're rushed. It means that you're writing for a different purpose than to get it right.
I catch myself doing that, and I've used the car imagery a lot with people because I do see it in people other than me a lot, but it's one that I do catch myself doing so often is I will be allowed to have lunch when I've done this. And then you think, who the hell are you doing this for? Why did you think that was a good idea? If you actually care about the reader, if you actually care about the stories and the character, do what's good for the story, not your ego. Your ego wants to know, oh, look, I can be so strong and do all of, not eat until I've finished however many 100 words. But actually, that isn't helping anything or anybody.
Exactly.
So I have a thing, not necessarily for writing, although this has happened with writing, where I will get absolutely obsessed and so immersed in a piece of work, an edit usually, often one of Emily's dramas when I'm doing the sound design or whatever, and I just forget to eat.
Yeah, I'm not sorry.
And I get to a point, thank you. I'll sometimes get to 3:30, 4 o'clock and think, what's that gnawing feeling in my tummy? And it's that I've not eaten. And I've not got up from my chair. I've not walked either. It's deeply unhealthy. But it's obsessive behaviour.
That is, yeah.
And I think some writers would fall into that if they are so in the zone. So is that something you've ever experienced?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a conversation I have with my partner because, like you, he's sound and visuals
Just
editing
very
all day.
similar things.
And he will say, I haven't got up from my chair since after we finished breakfast and he went in there. It is a thing. And all you can do, as with most things, is not make it a should, because the minute you say to yourself, I should have done something instead of this naughty me, you're doing what I was doing in my head of trying to please the non-existent slave master. Whereas if you are willing to look after yourself the way you would look after somebody you love, the characters in your story, the Dex legacy, if you as parents of this universe actually care about it, the way that I tend to talk to myself is, I will eat, because even if it does mean coming out of my head for a minute to go and do this and come back, actually I'm investing in the work that I'm doing more truthfully, better, by going off and eating and coming back. And this is how I remind myself, is that ego-wise it can make you feel like, ooh, look at the struggling artist, must be doing this well. But actually, if you stop struggling and invest in what it actually needs from you, the whole thing goes better.
Sharpen the saw, I think, was an analogy.
So that is Stephen R. Covey. That is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the old story goes, you're in the forest and you see somebody chopping down a tree. And you get closer and you see what's going on, and they are sweating and they are trying to chop down this tree with this very blunt saw. And you say, do you not want to maybe stop and sharpen the saw? And they say, I can't possibly stop and sharpen my saw. I've got a tree to cut down.
Yeah.
And there, but for the grace of God, go absolutely all of us.
Yeah.
I think there's another way of looking at that. John Stuart Mill's higher pleasures versus lower pleasures. Yeah. You need to satiate the lower pleasures, which is food, exercise, sex. He lists along there. I mean, he considers that a lower pleasure. I mean, whether or not you would as well, I don't know.
I feel like holding up scorecards for John Stewart.
Absolutely. I mean, like, he's clearly setting a low bar there. But so that one. And then higher pleasures would be reading, philosophizing, and
editing audio drama.
Exactly. So you need to satiate the lower pleasures to then be able
it's
to focus on
It's not a high shelf
higher.
to reach for, put it that way. You can get that stuff done first, and then you can do this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's go on then to talk about
not John Stuart Mill's sex life. Yeah, okay.
Talk more about those lower pleasures. No.
John Stuart Mill's Lower Pleasures, brought to you by Alternative Stories.
So utilitarianism for you folks. So let's look at.
Future there.
You mentioned sleep there, and I'm thinking back to when we had a chat with Nigel Planer, who actually advocated or said that it had helped him, I think.
Yeah.
In his writing room, he has a sofa.
He has a lovely sort of chair sofa thing by his desk, and he will go and nap in it and come back.
I mean, is that something that you've ever tried,
I
either
can't
of
nap.
you?
I'm one of those people. I'm so envious of people who can have a nap and come back and be strong. If I nap, I'm done for the day. And I know there are different types of people. And the nappers in the world will look at you and say, no, well, the trick is you have to nap for 20 minutes. The problem is it takes me 40 minutes to get to nap.
Yes.
And then by the time I nap, I go straight into a very deep nap. And 20 minutes is just not enough. And then I come round feeling knackered.
I thought I was a non-napper. And I still am a non-napper. But in April, I know I mentioned this before, I finally did the Transcendental Meditation course that I'd wanted to do for years and years. And part of my fuel, not just as a writer, but as a partner, as a friend, as an everything else that I am, that 20 minutes plus 3 to come out of it in the morning and 20 minutes plus 3 to come out of it in the evening, I have found has centered me a lot more. I've seen the difference in how present I am in situations. And I've seen what happens when I'm not. I know I mentioned, but didn't want to go into details with the contact lenses story. You can have that one later. All I will say is I have seen physical actions I do every day. If I'm not quite in my body, if I'm not quite in my mind, bad things happen. Whereas if I am in my body and in my mind, it all definitely goes better. And that has become the fuel. And at first, I found it enormously difficult. And I'm not going to go on about this for hours, but the thing that now happens when I do it, it's not about the meditation itself, it's not about how you feel while you're meditating. It's about what happens in your life when you're not meditating. And because I've seen my results improve, that fuel is enormously powerful for me. And it did make me rethink the I'm not a nap person and go to, I'm not a nap person. I don't nap. But on the other hand, it's very likely, given the time measurements, that for those for whom it works, what's going on is a similar thing. You stop chasing tails, you stop and you go into you and you come back refreshed with greater clarity, and it is a very literal fuel.
Well, I want to talk about a couple of other things that I think fall under the category of fuel. We've mentioned sleep, the nap thing, but I mean, do you notice if you don't get a good night's sleep that your writing drops off?
Everything drops off.
I
can't do it. If I'm good on 8 hours, 7 hours is I can cope. 6 hours, not okay. 6 hours and less, really not okay. So that's sort of my bar. If I'm realising time is going in the evening and I'm not going to get 7 hours sleep at least, I know that the next day is going to be very, very hard. And
it's sort of a bargaining chip thing going on sometimes, isn't it? That I don't know if you have this, but sometimes depending on what else is happening in the previous day or the next day, I will do that bargain. I will need to move some of my sleep to where I'd rather it wasn't in order to do whatever the thing is you have to do. But it's juggling that with knowing when your natural creative time is, and yours is nighttime, mine is daytime.
Yeah.
But there is always a bit of a juggling situation going on.
I really hate the fact that in our society it is so geared to morning people. 50% of people are nighttime people. And
I think it's higher.
I think it's actually higher. But, our day is so geared towards AM. Like, if you get up early, you're considered, productive. But, I mean,
virtuous.
to the point that, I mean, like, I've got my colleagues and everything will say, it was the weekend, so I didn't, get up until 10. And they're like, oh, if only I could sleep in until 10. That sounds so wonderful to get that much sleep. And I'm like, I was still working at 1:30 in the morning, and you'd been in bed 3.5 hours. There's no recognition for the fact that while they're asleep in the evening, I'm being productive. That's not recognised. It's only recognised if it's in the morning after sleeping.
It's
the
so funny
productivity
hearing
gets,
this.
given credit.
I really want to send that back through time to when, in my 20s, I felt exactly the opposite way, that the people that I was hanging around with were mostly 1:30 in the morning creative people, and I wasn't. And I felt so like I was less worthy, less cool than the artists that I knew who were doing that. A lot of things were going into that with who I was and, my own development, but it's not in a horrible way, but kind of reassuring that all of these feelings are out there, that it's not just in one direction.
I think it's when you get into a workplace and the work day is 9 to 5 or not, 9 to 6 now, but a lot of people start at 8 and go until 5 instead if you've got flexi hours, and the people who get in at 8 are always seen as very on it. But if you've got flexi hours and you can start from 8 till 10 and then leave from 5 until 7, I've noticed this. If you're one of the people who gets in at 10, people are like, oh, you slept in.
Yeah.
And it's always this sort of, you can't get up in the morning, as opposed to you are still working at midnight.
Yeah.
That's the assumption of the thing. I think it's the work day that does that. Like when you're in academia, I think it's a bit different when you're like not in the 9 till 6 job routine. It's something that happened noticeably when I started working in a office sort of environment. The attitude, like people coming in saying, oh yeah, well, I woke up at 5 and I did my yoga and I went for a run and then I've done this and I couldn't
still managed to be here by 8. I've
been here since 8 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't possibly sleep in but any later than 5, and they look very smug about it, and that's
But so let's think then about the creative side of the times that we feel best writing.
Yeah. Sorry about my rant there.
No, but I think it is very relevant because workplaces our world seems to gear itself to larks rather than owls, doesn't it? But lots of creatives are ours, I think. But so what is it about the times, how big is that time window in which you can write or comfortably write? Neither of you saying I can't possibly write at other times, but from experience what the best times to write
sort of
are.
if you were to wave your magic wand and it could be this time consistently.
Yeah.
What would? Yeah. Mine's always. I've always said that if I wave my magic wand and could just make a certain time of the day last longer, so I get more done in it, it would be from about 10:30 to 11:30. So around 11 in the morning, because it's still an early coffee time. It's like that pitch perfect moment
we're back
where
to
it's still
coffee again.
I'm not going to remove credit where it is absolutely due. The ritual I have found that I enjoy, that does things chemically, but also just does things in terms of the noise the coffee pot makes, the satisfying sound as it goes into the particular mug. There is a particular mug. It's great. You find things that work for you. And I like that. And I'm not like Nigel in the napping thing, but I am like Nigel in actually talking to him was enormously helpful in terms of the permission it gives you, because so the room that we're recording in now, I've got my desk in here. It's the living room that I share with my partner, but it's mine during the day. And I've got my desk, so I can be at my desk. But I've realised, give yourself permission to be on this sofa for this and that sofa for that, and by the window and out over there and things like that. Partly from Nigel Planer and partly from my beloved cat, Teddy, who died in 2019, who showed me a really useful behaviour, which was one week this particular armchair would be the only armchair that there was and no other sofa would do, and this was the most important place in the room. And next week it would be this sofa and then it would be over there. And I am very like Teddy in that I like to move my spaces around, so I'll be at the desk, but then there'll be certain things that if I take it onto the sofa, suddenly there's a clean slate feeling to what I'm doing, and it might be that different projects happen in different corners, or it might simply be that I'm being pure Teddy, and that this week I'm in that chair, and that week I'm in that chair, and that week I'm in that chair, and those things fuel me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So variety of outlook. And
I mean, I'm going to be honest, when I was in my 20s and thought I could only write in cafes, I had a different attitude to money, and I'm now running my own business, and I weaned myself into this being my cafe. And we now have Spotify, and we now have all sorts of other things that help.
Sure.
But yeah, the spatial thing is a fuel. Space
and time. I mean, my most productive time is anywhere between 4 in the afternoon and 2 o'clock in the morning.
And often that entire span.
A lot of the time, yeah. I will really start to get going and get my momentum up by 4 in the afternoon, and then I will be running pretty consistent until 2 in the morning. I mean, I force myself to take breaks, but my natural rhythm, I mean, my spouse and I are the same, which doesn't necessarily help because we're a bad influence on each other. But when we were working 10 until 7 or something, but after the weekend, we start work jet lagged because we're going to bed over the weekend. As soon as it's Friday night, we're staying up until 2:30 in the morning and waking up at 11. And then when the work week starts, suddenly we have to wake up earlier. Yeah. We're thrown out of whack. It's starting the week jet lagged.
Yeah.
And that's annoying. But those are my productive hours. I find morning is when I'm fueling and sort of doing the bodily things that I need to do. Fueling and gassing.
That could have been more alliterative. I'm interested that you didn't choose to make it more alliterative.
I shall not lower the tone. We've already talked about John Stuart Mill's sex life.
Could I throw one more in? Not one more of what she was suggesting, but
by all means.
Well, first time for everything. But another kind of fuel that I was just thinking about is people. Just as I was saying that walking away from the desk in order to eat and reminding yourself that's how you truly invest in what you're doing. A similar one for me is not thinking that completely empty time and the opportunity for all hours of the day to be writing is necessarily always going to help. If it does, brilliant. For me personally, empty days where I can devote it entirely to writing are wonderful, but they're luxury items in a way for a lot of people. And I find that if I've got, for example, a writing morning and then a coaching afternoon, so I'm maybe seeing Writers' Gym members or I'm seeing other private clients and then I'm teaching Lambda exams or I'm at the university or something like that, actually the reality of it is that next time I'm writing after that, although I'm frustrated I had to move away and do it, I do come back kind of refreshed. I think I am the psychological equivalent of more than one browser open. As I said with Nigel and with Gareth Powell, procrastinating sideways is
yes.
a big thing for me. And actually filling time with other people is not just a nuisance, it's creative fuel, either literally because it all goes into the melting pot in your brain, it all goes into your artist's palette, but also simply because of doing something else. I come back refreshed for the first thing I was doing.
One more thing I want to talk about on the physical side of things, and then we need to go on to the
cerebral
things that encourage us cerebrally or intellectually. And that's walking, exercises, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just very briefly, do you build a walk or some exercise into your day? And where do you do it in relation to your writing? Is it straight before? Is it in the middle? Or
it kind of depends on the day, if I'm seeing clients or if I'm not. What doesn't change is that if I have a walk between somewhere and somewhere else, the ideas do happen while I'm walking.
Yes.
But it's a bit like in a previous episode, we talked about reading. For me, walking happens the same way. If I start going, right, inspiration, come on, then obviously the inspiration is going to go, fuck you, that's not how I work.
Yeah.
And off it's going to go. But if you're doing it for its own sake, ideas start pinging off each other. And new sparks definitely do happen. But I do find that tricking myself into it is quite useful. That if I genuinely have to walk somewhere, it's a sort of wink or nod to myself that, yeah, we know that's going to be a useful thing, but we're not going to put too much pressure on it. We're just going to let it do its thing. So yeah, I schedule so that there is a walk involved most days. I don't do it every day, and I'm going to use that wonderful word now. I should. But because it's still a should rather than I found a way in that suits me, that's why it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Emily, you're a walker.
I am a walker. I find myself just better in my body and mind if I do that. I've got a dodgy history with sort of depression and get a bit of body dysmorphia and things. So being able to regulate my body by way of exercise, this is a very complicated topic. Obviously, I'm skirting over an awful lot here.
Yeah.
But being able to regulate my body and being able to exercise regularly allows me to manage that side so that I can focus on other things. Because if I didn't manage that side, I would potentially not be very happy about that side, and then it would impact everything else.
As well.
So
yes.
It's a case of self-management in that respect, and the walking is therapy as much as it is. I mean, I have Spotify playlists, we've chatted about this before, for characters. Usually when I'm writing, put those playlists on, and yeah, I'm thinking about the characters, like I'm interviewing myself about the characters. I've listened to pieces of music that have spawned entire episodes of Dex Legacy, but it is a case of I need to get out and I need to do this. And it's not to fuel the writing, it's to regulate me. And yeah, fuel the writer. That is important. I'm quite disciplined about it. I will go out every day. Normally, before lockdown, I was walking to and from the station every day and walking around at work. Then when lockdown happened, that stopped. And for a couple of years, I was always thinking, well, when I go back to the office, I'll be walking to the station every single day. And it took me quite some time to realise that might not actually ever happen. And I might not ever be in that situation again.
The same way again.
Where I am going to be walking. Then I had to change the way I thought and think, okay, now I have to actually make an effort to do this every day myself. But it is important that I do. And I've been a lot better since I started doing that.
Well, I think we probably talk a lot more about walking and exercise, as you touched on the fact that it is inspiration as well as exercise. So it's two birds with one stone. I'm sure we'll talk about that in an episode at some point in the future. But just coming back to the slightly less tangible sorts of fuel, I want to talk about ambition.
Ooh, okay.
And how big a part does ambition play in getting you onto your seat to write?
For me, it's aspiration.
Yeah.
I think that they have a lot of overlap. I think a lot of the people around me, particularly female thinking, there was a sense in a lot of areas where I was when I was growing up, that the whole thing about women as, you could be a mother, you could be a teacher, you could be a carer, you could be a journalist even, but ambition, I don't want to say it was a dirty word, but I'll give you an example of what I'm thinking about and why I'm finding it difficult to make the sentences. There was somebody who, when we were talking about objectives and I want, said, couldn't we reword it because it sounds like Veruca Salt? It sounds spoiled.
I wanted to pull up.
And that was a very, very intelligent academic person, older than me, who I have so much respect for as a thinker. And for me, that was quite a useful moment because it made me realise, or maybe verbalise for myself, what this has been coming from, that it's more than that I want. They'd have phrased it in certain generations as I should like. There's so much to unpack there. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that maybe I don't visualise it as ambition because that implies to me that's something that I intrinsically am not and could be, whereas aspiration is when I was sort of changing a lot of things about my life, and I remember writing down a list of what I wanted for me and what I wanted to surround myself with, and one of the things that I noticed was who around me are aspirational people, who are working to be the best versions of themselves, their personal life, their career, whatever it happened to be, who was feeling like that and who was more sort of didn't want to maybe look at how things could get bigger. That was something that I personally had my own things going on with. So for me, it's about, if I'm not writing something in particular, I do my best to look very carefully at what it would mean to me if I were doing it. And if the reason I'm not writing it is actually it's important to me, I make the time and space to be honest with myself about that as best I can. Because it's so easy to just keep doing what you're already doing. And that's when people start getting resentful, and that's when people start feeling trapped. So it's a case of, before one feels trapped, what can one do to expand one's own universe? And it doesn't all come from you. Of course, it comes from outside things as well. But the outside things can't help you if you're not helping you. So for me, aspiration is a huge thing. And I suppose if I have an answer to that question, it's be on the lookout. It's know what you want and know that you have every right to want it, and that the world will be better for you doing something about that.
Emily, you have talked about fear being a fuel, and I think what you mean by that is your audio drama has the best part of 250,000 downloads.
At the moment,
there is a fan base. Yeah. There is an expectation. And can you say a little bit about what that makes you feel as a writer?
The fear.
It's not all good and proud, is it?
No. The fear is not a healthy way of being fueled, but it definitely fueled me for a long time. When I started writing the novels, I hadn't finished a novel since I was 14. And I got to a point where I was worried that I would never be able to. And the fear at that point was, I don't know if I'm going to finish this. So it became an obsession. And for 3 months, I did nothing but write. And I was just terrified that I wouldn't get to the end. And it was a real vomit draft for that reason, because I was just going like total wipeout style, just not hitting the obstacles, keep running. So that was definitely fear-based. Now I say so much fear, but very legitimate concerns. That I might fall short, or that I might not deliver, or that, I mean, you're talking about aspiration versus ambition. I would say I'm ambitious, and I will own that word, because for me, I have ambition to grow an audience, and I am growing an audience. I have ambition to write and give people something that they can become obsessed with, and I am sort of putting stuff in process to make that, but it's all ambition. Those are ambitious goals that are not necessarily within me. I am working towards fueling that for other people. That's ambition. That's sort of a success that is like, I would just call that ambition.
Yeah.
I have a sort of a love for these characters, and I want other people to feel that love too.
Yeah.
That is my ambition, is to be able to, a friend of mine, I was saying, there's nothing, nobody really knows what to do with the Dex Legacy because it's not like anything else. I'm getting feedback from places where it's like, well, this just isn't fitting with what we've got going on at the moment, or we wouldn't know where to put this on a shelf. And he said to me, if it doesn't fit in a box, make your own box and fill it with the Dex Legacy. So that really resonated with me. And I'm basically working towards doing it. And my ambition is to create a box of stuff so big that people can fall into it for several years and not come out. And when they do come out, they are changed and it's kind of part of them and it's got under their skin. That's my ambition. And the fear comes from failing to do that. Now, I have a fear of not disappointing other people, but disappointing myself. I know what I'm capable of, and the idea of not achieving what I'm capable of is quite upsetting to me. And I worry about it. When I was at university, my dad was terminally ill and he died just before my final year. And I didn't take a break because I didn't want to lose that momentum. And I told myself my dad was the reason I went to university. So I shouldn't give up. But I was also aware of the fact that if I didn't do the very best that I could, I would disappoint myself forever. And I didn't want to blame that on my dad, like, oh, I would have got this grade, but my dad died. I didn't want that to be the case. So I just completely buckled down, and it changed me as a person. It re-triggered my epilepsy. It was a horrible, stressful situation that I put myself through. Nobody else was pressuring me to do this. I got my first, and I'm very proud of myself. It wasn't healthy. And I admit that this ambition does potentially fuel unhealthy habits. So when it comes to habits and it comes to inspiration and it comes to these things, I am trying to get better, but I'm very self-aware of the fact that the main drivers in my life are not necessarily the most positive, are not necessarily the most nourishing, and are potentially stress-based as opposed to growth-based. And that is a problem, but I don't think it's an unusual problem. I don't think I'm the only one who does this. And that's why I'm talking about it quite openly and freely here, because all we can do is recognize that and recognize that it's something that we can potentially work on. And maybe some people embrace it and they say, oh no, I'm just a stressful writer. Yeah, okay, whatever. Like that's everybody's decision. You can make that for yourself. I think it's something that I should work on because I don't see it as sustainable. And I intend to be doing this for a long time. I've got a big box that I want to fill with Deck's legacy.
Yeah. Do you feel, though, that in some way the audio drama being out there and being listened to demonstrably is justifying?
Yeah, it fuels it.
Yeah.
Yeah, justifies it in a way, because it's like, I know that I'm onto something. If I'd started writing this, if I'd opened the box and started putting stuff in it, and so far 5 people had shown an interest in it, I might think, you know what, that box is, just maybe I'll put that under the bed and work on something else. But people like it. And I know that I'm on the right track with what I'm doing. It's just the way I'm doing it is potentially something I can grow on.
On that, James Graham, our generation's most successful playwright, 3 plays on in the West End on the same street at what time on Desert Island Discs, talked about how he was hiding the workaholism. It's a really fascinating episode, and he chooses a Bowie track, so gotta go there. There's always a link. But he talked about the workaholism and how fear was fueling that, and I completely acknowledge that success and the reasons behind it can look very simplistic from the outside, but there is also the ability that you're experiencing, and that I'm sure lots of other people listening will empathise with a great deal, which is that your fear can be your muse. And it doesn't mean it's completely healthy, and it doesn't mean it's completely unhealthy. But yeah, I felt that I'd essentially wasted my 20s and early 30s by trying to be what other people wanted and listening to all the shoulds. And now that I know how much better life can be and how much more of me I can put into it, there is a sense that I so recognise in what you're saying of, I don't want to not do it, I don't want to lose any time, I don't want to not be the fullest version of myself that I can be. And there is a pressure to it. So I guess for me, it is about keeping those, almost like a meeting with yourself. When you were describing walking, Emily, and you were describing how you'd be sorting things out in your head, an old friend of mine used to have this phrase, I had a meeting with myself, and she wasn't necessarily talking about writing, but it is very much like that. It's checking in And I suppose what I find helpful, whether we're thinking ambition, whether we're thinking
aspiration or,
whatever we're thinking, that checking in and going, what do I want to happen, allows you to focus on what is the thing, the whole thought behind say the thing, what is the thing, and then you know the difference between what is the thing and all the fluff around the thing, all of the vacuum cleaner fluff that you can picture around that sort of, what does this say about me, or how should I be doing it instead, and you can just push your finger right through the fluff and actually touch on the what is the thing, and focus on that. And for most of us listening or in this room, it's about the story and doing what you can do for the story, hence why it is a good idea to get up and give yourself lunch. Not because it's a should, but because it serves the story.
Yeah. Well, we could go on a lot more in this discussion, and I think inevitably these things are things that will crop up in other conversations that we have, because they get to the very core of what it is to be a writer and a storyteller. But the danger of this becoming the longest episode we've ever recorded is a very real one. So, Rachel, I'm going to ask you for an exercise or challenge to do with fuel.
I'm going to ask you to write out your ideal week. Maybe Monday to Sunday, maybe starting on Sunday, maybe even starting with the weekend. Already pick what makes sense to you. And show yourself what your ideal week would actually look like. What time you would be working on this, what time you would be doing that. I don't care how impossible it is. I don't care how this idiot on the radio doesn't understand how busy I am. I'm asking you to idealise. Look at that week, clutch that pencil as a magic wand, and draw out your ideal week so that you get to see what that actually looks like. It's a brave thing to do, to want things. Have a look at it. Even if you can't book it out for another year, look at it and see it and know what it looks like. And then, as an optional part B, I'm going to ask you, or maybe even creative I dare you, to take one step towards it. What one step could I do in my life today that doesn't solve it all at once, because those things don't exist, but takes one little step towards it?
That's definitely what I'm going to try. So, Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, thank you so much, particularly, I think, for honesty and
yeah, that went places.
sharing some really deep stuff. I hope that's been helpful to you, listeners.
Chris Gregory, thank you also.
Yes.
Well, I've not shared it the way that you have, but so.
Oh, yes, you have.
Chris Gregory should share so much more of this next episode.
It's the should fairies again. Rachel and Emily, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Writer's Gym podcast with Rachel Knightley, Emily Inkpen, and me, Chris Gregory. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel and the Writer's Gym, please go to rachelknightley.com. To find out more about Emily, please go to emilyinkpen.com. And for Chris, go to alternativestories.com. We'll print all these links and more in the show notes for this podcast. The Writer's Gym podcast is an Alternative Stories 2024 production for the Writer's Gym. Production, sound design and editing were by me, Chris Gregory.